I was 37 years old, standing in the middle of my family's annual reunion, when my mother's voice sliced through the chatter like a blade. "Zoe, when are you going to stop wasting your life on those silly paintings and get a real job?" The room went quiet, forks hovering over plates of potato salad, cousins glancing at each other, and my heart felt like it had been wrung out and left to dry. I stood there clutching a glass of cheap wine, my face burning, while my younger brother Ethan, the golden child. The doctor smirked from across the room. My parents beamed at him, their pride a spotlight that never once turned my way. I wanted to scream, to tell them they were wrong, that my art wasn't a hobby, wasn't a failure, but the words caught in my throat like ash. Instead, I smiled, the kind of smile you force when you're trying not to cry, and excused myself to the bathroom where I locked the door and let the tears come. My name is Zoe, and this is the story of how I learned that my worth doesn't depend on their approval or anyone's. But to understand that moment, that reunion, you have to know where it started, the roots of a wound that had been festering for decades. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where everyone knows your business and judges you for it. My parents were practical people, my dad a high school math teacher, my mom a nurse. They valued stability, predictability, things you could measure. Ethan, 4 years younger, fit their mold perfectly. He was the kid who brought home straight A's, who knew he wanted to be a doctor by the time he was 12. Me, I was the dreamer, the one who'd spend hours sketching in the margins of my notebooks, who'd sneak into the attic to paint on old bedsheets because we couldn't afford canvases. My parents didn't mind at first, kids draw, kids imagine. But as I got older, their patience thinned. "Art's a nice hobby, Zoe," my dad would say, "but it's not a career." By the time I was in high school, their disappointment was a constant hum in the background of my life. I wasn't a bad student. I got B's, sometimes A's, but I wasn't Ethan. I didn't have his focus, his drive for their version of success. What I had was a fire inside me, a need to create, to pour my feelings onto canvas in ways I couldn't explain. When I was 16, I won a local art contest, a small thing, $50, and a certificate. But to me, it was everything. I remember running home, clutching that certificate, thinking maybe now they'd see, maybe now they'd understand. I showed it to my mom, my hands shaking with excitement, and she glanced at it, nodded, and said, "That's nice, honey. Did you finish your algebra homework?" It was like a punch to the gut. I didn't show them my art after that, not for years. I kept it hidden, a secret I carried like a bruise. College was my chance to escape, or so I thought. I applied to art schools behind my parents' backs, using money I'd saved from babysitting to cover application fees. When I got into a decent program in Chicago, I was ecstatic until my parents found out. They sat me down, their faces grim, and told me they wouldn't pay for it. "We're not throwing money away on a degree that won't get you a job," my dad said. My mom added, "You're smart, Zoe. You could be a teacher, a nurse, something stable." I begged, I cried. I showed them my portfolio drawings and paintings I'd poured my soul into, but they wouldn't budge. In the end, I went to a state school, majored in business, to appease them, and took every art elective I could. It was a compromise, but it felt like a betrayal of myself. After college, I moved to Chicago anyway, scraping by on waitressing jobs, while I painted in a tiny roach-infested apartment. I'd send my parents photos of my work, sometimes hoping for a crumb of approval, but their responses were always the same. "That's nice, Zoe. How's the job hunt going?" Meanwhile, Ethan was in med school, racking up accolades, and every family gathering became a shrine to his achievements. I'd sit there listening to my aunts and uncles fawn over him while I was asked if I was still doing that art thing. The implication was clear. I was the disappointment, the one who'd chosen wrong. By the time I was 30, I'd had a few small gallery shows, nothing major but enough to keep me going. I was teaching art classes at a community center, selling the occasional piece, and building a quiet life I loved even if it wasn't glamorous, but my family couldn't see it. To them, I was wasting my potential, throwing away the stability they'd wanted for me. Every phone call with my mom ended with her sighing, "You could still go back to school." "Zoe, it's not too late." My dad would chime in Ethan's saving lives. "What are you doing?" It hurt every time, but I'd learned to swallow the pain, to keep my head down and keep painting. The reunion that year, the one where everything changed, was held at my parents' house, a sprawling Victorian they'd bought after Ethan started sending them money. I almost didn't go. I was exhausted physically, emotionally, from a year of late nights in my studio, from rejection letters, from galleries, from the constant weight of feeling like I wasn't enough. But my mom insisted, saying it had been too long since I'd seen everyone. So I packed a bag, drove the 3 hours from Chicago, and walked into a house full of people who'd already decided I was a failure. It started innocently enough. The usual small talk, cousins, asking about my life, aunts, offering unsolicited advice. I smiled, nodded, deflected. But then dinner began, and my mom stood up to give her annual toast. She talked about family, about pride, about how blessed they were to have Ethan, who'd just been promoted to chief resident at his hospital. The room erupted in applause, and I clapped too, because what else could I do? Then she turned to me, and I felt my stomach drop. "And Zoe," she said, her voice dripping with pity, "well, she's still trying to find her way. But we love her anyway." Laughter rippled through the room, not cruel, but careless, the kind that stings. "Because it doesn't even know it's hurting you." My dad chimed in. "Maybe one day she'll figure out what Ethan did. Hard work pays off." More laughter. Ethan raised his glass, smirking, and I felt like I was shrinking, disappearing into the floral wallpaper behind me. I don't know how I got through the rest of the meal. I pushed food around my plate, my throat tight, my eyes stinging. When my cousin asked me to pass the rolls, I mumbled an excuse and fled to the bathroom, locking myself in. I sat on the edge of the tub, staring at my reflection in the mirror, and I hated what I saw, not my face, but the defeat in my eyes. I'd spent my whole life trying to prove them wrong, and here I was, 37, still letting their words cut me open. I thought about my paintings, the ones I'd poured my heart into, the ones I'd stayed up until dawn to finish. Were they right? Was it all pointless? I didn't know it then, but that moment was the beginning of everything. That night, as I cried in my childhood bathroom, something was happening miles away, something that would change my life forever. A painting I'd created, a massive swirling canvas I'd called Unseen. A piece I'd poured every ounce of my pain and hope into, had been entered into a prestigious auction in New York. I hadn't entered it myself. I didn't even know it was there. But someone who believed in me, when I didn't believe in myself, had seen its worth. And as I sat there feeling like the smallest version of myself, that painting was about to sell for $1 million. I stayed in that bathroom longer than I meant to, the hum of the reunion seeping through the walls, laughter clinking glasses, my aunt's too loud voice recounting Ethan's latest triumph. Each sound felt like a needle pricking at the raw edges of my heart. I splashed cold water on my face, trying to wash away the tears, but the ache in my chest wouldn't budge. I kept seeing my mother's face, the way her lips curled with pity, when she said we love her anyway. Anyway. That word was a weight, a reminder that my existence was something they tolerated, not celebrated. I wanted to leave, to grab my keys and drive back to Chicago, but the thought of facing them again, to say goodbye, felt unbearable. So I stayed sitting on the edge of the tub, my phone in my hand, scrolling through old photos of my paintings to remind myself I wasn't nothing. There was one photo, a close-up of Unseen, the painting I'd finished a year ago. It was huge, 6 feet by 4 swirls of deep indigo and fiery red with flecks of gold that caught the light like stars. I'd painted it during a dark time after a gallery rejected my work, saying it was too emotional, not commercial enough. I'd poured every ounce of that rejection, every moment of feeling invisible, into that canvas. Looking at it now on my phone screen, I felt a flicker of pride, but it was quickly swallowed by doubt. What was the point? My family didn't see it. They didn't see me. I don't know how long I sat there lost in my thoughts, but eventually there was a soft knock on the door. "Zoe, you okay in there?" It was my grandmother, Nana Ruth, my dad's mom. Her voice was gentle, the kind that wraps around you like a warm blanket. I hesitated, wiping my eyes, then unlocked the door. She stood there, her silver hair pulled into a loose bun, her eyes sharp despite her 82 years. She didn't say anything at first, just stepped inside and closed the door behind her. Then she sat on the closed toilet lid, her hands folded in her lap, and looked at me. "You don't have to tell me what happened," she said, "but I know that look. I've worn it myself." I didn't know what to say. Nana Ruth was the only one in the family who'd ever seemed to get me. When I was a kid, she'd let me sit in her kitchen sketching while she baked, never once telling me to focus on something practical. She'd been a seamstress making wedding dresses for half the town, and she'd always said her work was her art. But she'd also lived through a marriage to a man who belittled her son, my dad, who dismissed her dreams, and a world that told her she was just a housewife. If anyone understood feeling unseen, it was her. I told her everything, the words, spilling out like water from a cracked dam. My mom's toast, my dad's jab, Ethan's smirk, the laughter that followed. I told her how it felt like I'd been fighting my whole life for a scrap of their respect, and how I was starting to wonder if they were right. Maybe I was wasting my life. Maybe I should have listened, gone to nursing school, settled for a life that made them proud. Nana Ruth listened, her face calm, but her eyes fierce like she was holding back a storm. When I finished, she reached out and took my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Zoe," she said, "you listen to me. Your heart is your gift, and your art is how you share it. They don't understand because they're afraid of what they can't measure. But that doesn't make them right. It makes them small." Her words hit me hard, like a lifeline thrown into choppy water. I wanted to believe her, but the pain was still too fresh, too heavy. "What do I do, Nana?" I asked, my voice breaking. "How do I keep going when it feels like this?" She smiled a small, knowing smile. "You keep painting. You keep telling your truth. And one day they'll see what I see. A woman who's stronger than all of them combined." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small, worn sketchbook, one I recognized from my childhood. It was hers, filled with pencil drawings of dresses she'd designed but never made. She pressed it into my hands. "This kept me going when I felt like giving up. Now it's yours. Don't let them take your fire, Zoe." I hugged her, clinging to her like I was a kid again, and for the first time that night, I felt like I could breathe. When we finally left the bathroom, the reunion was winding down. I avoided my parents' eyes, ignored Ethan's half-hearted attempt to make small talk, and slipped out to my car. Nana Ruth's sketchbook sat on the passenger seat, a quiet reminder that I wasn't alone. I drove back to Chicago that night, the road blurring through my tears, but something had shifted inside me. It wasn't hope not yet, but it was resolve. I wasn't going to let them define me anymore. The weeks that followed were hard. I went back to my life teaching art classes, painting in my cramped studio, sending out applications to galleries that rarely responded. But the reunion had left a mark, a raw, tender spot that ached every time I thought about my family. I stopped calling my parents, stopped sending them updates about my life. When my mom texted asking why I was being distant, I didn't reply. I couldn't find the words to explain how much they'd hurt me, how their love felt like a transaction I could never afford. Instead, I threw myself into my work painting with a ferocity I hadn't felt in years. Every brushstroke was a defiance, a way of saying I'm still here. One afternoon, while I was cleaning brushes at the community center, one of my students, a shy 15-year-old named Maya, lingered after class. She was a quiet kid, always sketching in the corners of her notebook. Her drawings full of emotion she didn't know how to express. "Miss Zoe," she said, her voice hesitant, "do you ever feel like nobody gets your art? Like maybe it's not good enough?" I looked at her, her big brown eyes, searching for something I recognized all too well. I wanted to tell her it got easier, that the world would always see her worth, but I couldn't lie. Sometimes I said, sitting next to her, "But you know what? The people who matter, the ones who see the world the way you do, they'll find you. And until then, you keep creating because your art is your voice. Don't let anyone silence it." She nodded, her face brightening, and I realized I was talking to myself as much as I was talking to her. Maya became a regular in my classes, and over time she started opening up, showing me her sketches, trusting me with her dreams. Teaching her, watching her grow, reminded me why I loved art in the first place. It wasn't about fame or money. It was about connection, about saying something true. Around that time, I got a call from an old college friend, Lena, who ran a small gallery in Chicago. She'd always been supportive, even when I doubted myself, and she'd seen Unseen at a group show I'd done the previous year. "Zoe," she said, her voice practically vibrating with excitement, "I need to tell you something, but you have to promise not to freak out." I laughed, thinking she was exaggerating, but her next words stopped me cold. I submitted Unseen to an auction in New York. A big one. And it's getting attention, like serious attention. I didn't know what to say. I'd never even considered auctions. My work was small-time local, not the kind of thing that ended up in fancy catalogs. How I stammered. Why Lena explained that she'd shown a photo of Unseen to a curator friend who'd been blown away and insisted on including it in the auction. "Zoe, this could be huge," she said, "but I didn't want to tell you until I was sure it was happening. The auction's in a few weeks. Just keep doing what you're doing." I hung up my hands, shaking. Part of me was thrilled, but another part was terrified. What if it flopped? What if it sold for pennies, proving my family right? I didn't tell anyone, not even Nana Ruth. I couldn't bear the thought of getting my hopes up, only to have them crushed. But as the days passed, I started to let myself imagine what it could mean. Not just the money, but the validation, the chance to say, "See, I wasn't wrong." I kept teaching, kept painting, kept living my life. But there was a new energy in me, a spark I hadn't felt in years. I started working on a new piece, a companion to Unseen. All blues and silvers, like a storm breaking open to reveal the sky. I painted late into the night, Nana Ruth's sketchbook open beside me. Her drawings of dresses reminding me that art could be a lifeline. I didn't know it then, but the auction was just days away, and my life was about to change in ways I couldn't imagine. The days leading up to the auction were a blur, a strange mix of anticipation and dread that kept me awake at night. I'd lie in my tiny Chicago apartment, staring at the cracked ceiling, imagining every possible outcome. In one version, Unseen sold for a fortune, and I'd finally have the money to move to a real studio, to buy proper supplies to prove to my family that I wasn't a failure. In another, it didn't sell at all, and I'd be left with nothing but the sting of rejection, my parents' voices echoing in my head. "We told you so." I tried to focus on my routine, teaching classes, painting, grabbing coffee with Lena when she wasn't swamped at her gallery, but the auction loomed like a storm cloud, impossible to ignore. Lena called me every few days with updates, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Zoe, the buzz is unreal," she'd say. "People are talking about Unseen on art blogs. Collectors are asking about you." I wanted to believe her, but doubt was a heavy thing, and I'd carried it too long to set it down easily. I hadn't told anyone else, not Maya, not Nana Ruth, not even my neighbor, who'd become a friend over shared late-night pizza runs. It felt too fragile, like speaking it aloud would jinx it. Instead, I poured my energy into my new painting, the one I'd started after the reunion. I called it Breaking, and it was all sharp angles and soft edges. Blues bleeding into silvers, like a wave crashing against a cliff. Every stroke felt like a release, a way to channel the fear and hope swirling inside me. Teaching kept me grounded. Maya was coming out of her shell, showing up to class with sketches that were bolder, more confident. One day she brought in a drawing of a girl standing in a storm, her hair whipping around her face, her eyes fierce. "It's you," she said shyly, handing it to me. I stared at it, my throat tight. The girl in the drawing didn't look defeated or small. She looked unbreakable. "Maya, this is incredible," I said, and I meant it. She beamed, and for a moment I forgot about the auction, forgot about my family, forgot about everything except the fact that I was making a difference, even if it was just for one kid. But the auction was never far from my mind. Lena had sent me a link to the auction house's website, and I'd check it obsessively, scrolling through the catalog to find Unseen. Listed among works by artists I'd studied in school, names I never dreamed I'd be mentioned alongside. The description called it a visceral exploration of resilience and hidden strength, and I felt a pang of pride, followed by a wave of imposter syndrome. Who was I to be in this company? I was just Zoe, the girl who painted in a roach-infested apartment, who couldn't afford real canvases until she was 25. I tried to push the thoughts away, but they clung to me, heavy and persistent. The night before the auction, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my studio Nana Ruth's sketchbook, open on the table, flipping through her drawings of dresses, elegant, intricate designs that never saw the light of day. I wondered what she'd felt sketching these in a world that didn't care, a world that told her to be practical, to be small. I traced the lines of a gown with my finger, its bodice adorned with tiny imagined pearls, and I felt a surge of gratitude for her. She'd given me more than a sketchbook. She'd given me permission to keep going, to believe in myself when no one else did. I closed the book and picked up my brush, adding a final layer to breaking a streak of gold that cut through the storm like a promise. The day of the auction, I was a wreck. Lena had told me it would be live-streamed, but I couldn't bring myself to watch. What if it flopped? What if the room stayed silent? The auctioneer's gavel falling like a verdict. I turned off my phone, locked my studio door, and spent the morning teaching a class at the community center. Maya and the other kids were working on self-portraits, and I walked around offering feedback, trying to lose myself in their laughter and chatter. But my mind kept drifting to New York, to a room full of strangers, holding paddles, deciding the worth of my heart. When class ended, I stayed late, cleaning brushes, organizing supplies, anything to keep my hands busy. Maya lingered again, her sketchbook tucked under her arm. "Miss Zoe, you seem off," she said, her voice tentative. "Is everything okay?" I forced a smile, but it felt brittle, like it might crack. "Just a big day," I said, hoping she wouldn't press. She didn't, but she gave me a quick hug before leaving, and it was enough to make my eyes sting. I locked up the center and walked home, the Chicago wind biting at my cheeks. My stomach knotted with nerves. I'd promised myself I wouldn't check my phone until the next day. But when I got to my apartment, I couldn't resist. I powered it on my hands, trembling, and saw a flood of notifications. Texts from Lena, missed calls, voicemails. My heart pounded as I opened her latest message. "Zoe, call me now. You won't believe this." I fumbled with the phone, nearly dropping it, and dialed her number. She picked up on the first ring, her voice so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "Zoe, oh my God. Zoe, it sold. Unseen sold," she screamed. "For $1 million, $1 million. I froze, the words not sinking in. $1 million? It was impossible, a number so big it felt like a mistake. "Lena, are you serious?" I whispered, my voice shaking. "Dead serious," she said, and I could hear her grinning through the phone. The room went wild, Zoe. Bidding war paddles everywhere. "You're a star." I sank onto my couch, my legs giving out. $1 million. My painting, the one I'd created in a haze of pain and defiance, had sold for $1 million. I laughed, then cried, then laughed again, the emotions tumbling over each other like waves. Lena was still talking something about collectors' interviews, a gallery wanting to represent me, but I could barely hear her. All I could think was they were wrong. My parents, Ethan. Everyone who'd laughed at me, they were wrong. But even in that moment, the joy was tangled with something else, a ache I couldn't name. I thought about my family, about the reunion, about the way they'd looked at me like I was a lost cause. Part of me wanted to call them, to rub it in their faces, to say, "See, I did it." But another part, the part that had sat with Nana Ruth in that bathroom, knew it wouldn't change anything. Their approval was a mirage, always just out of reach. I didn't need it anymore. I thanked Lena, promised to call her back, and hung up. My apartment was quiet, the only sound the hum of the radiator. I walked to my studio, picked up Nana Ruth's sketchbook, and opened it to a random page, a dress with a flowing train, sketched in soft pencil. I smiled, tears blurring my vision, and whispered, "Thank you." For the first time in years, I felt like I was enough. The next few days were a whirlwind. Lena wasn't kidding about the attention. My phone buzzed constantly, galleries, journalists, even a curator from a museum in London. I was invited to speak at an art conference, offered a solo show at a gallery in Chicago. It was overwhelming but exhilarating, like stepping into a life I'd always dreamed of, but never dared to believe was mine. I started to see my name in articles, my face in photos from the auction's press release. Unseen was called a breakout masterpiece, and I had to pinch myself to make sure I wasn't dreaming. But the real test was coming. The family reunion was still fresh in my mind, and I knew I'd have to face them again, not just my parents and Ethan, but the aunts, uncles, cousins, who'd laughed, who'd pitied me. I didn't know how or when, but I knew it was inevitable. And when it happened, I wanted to be ready, not with anger, but with the quiet strength Nana Ruth had seen in me all along. The weeks after the auction felt like stepping into someone else's life. My tiny apartment with its peeling paint and wobbly kitchen table suddenly seemed too small for the world that was opening up around me. My phone didn't stop buzzing, calls from galleries, emails from curators, even a message from a collector in Paris who wanted to commission a piece. Lena was my anchor, fielding offers and helping me navigate the chaos, but even she couldn't keep up with the pace. "Zoe, you're a phenomenon," she'd say, half laughing, half awestruck. I'd smile, but inside I was still grappling with the weight of it all. $1 million. My painting, born from nights of doubt and defiance, had changed everything, or so it seemed. I kept teaching at the community center because it was the one place where I felt like myself, not the overnight art star the blogs were calling me. Maya and the other kids didn't care about auctions or collectors. They just wanted to draw, to create, to share their stories. One afternoon, Maya showed me a new sketch, a vibrant scene of a girl painting under a glowing sky. "It's you again," she said, her voice soft but sure. "You look happy." I looked at the drawing, the way the girl's brush seemed to light up the canvas, and I felt a lump in my throat. Happy. Was I was proud, overwhelmed, maybe even a little triumphant, but happy felt like a word I hadn't earned yet. The truth was, the auction hadn't erased the pain of the reunion. It hadn't undone the years of my parents' disappointment, Ethan's smugness, or the laughter that had followed me into that bathroom. I hadn't told my family about the sale, and they hadn't reached out since I'd gone silent after the reunion. Part of me wondered if they'd heard small towns talk, and news like this travels fast, but their silence felt like a confirmation of what I'd always known. They didn't see me, not really. I tried to focus on the present, on the opportunities piling up, but the past clung to me, a shadow I couldn't shake. One evening, I got a call from the art conference I'd been invited to speak at. It was in Chicago, a big event with artists, critics, and collectors from around the world. They wanted me to give a keynote address to talk about Unseen and my journey as an artist. I said yes before I could overthink it, but as soon as I hung up, panic set in. A keynote, me standing in front of hundreds of people, telling my story. I'd spent my life hiding my art, from my family guarding it like a secret. Now I was supposed to lay it bare for strangers. I called Lena, my voice shaky. "I can't do this," I said. "I'm not a speaker. I'm not inspiring." She laughed, not unkindly. "Zoe, are you kidding? Your work is inspiring. You're inspiring. Just tell the truth. That's all they want." I wasn't convinced, but I trusted Lena, so I started preparing. I spent nights in my studio, Nana Ruth's sketchbook open beside me, jotting down thoughts about what Unseen meant to me. It wasn't just a painting, it was every moment I'd felt invisible, every time I'd been told I wasn't enough. Writing about it was like peeling back layers of myself, raw and painful, but also freeing. The day of the conference, I was a bundle of nerves. I wore a simple black dress, my hair pulled back. Nana Ruth's sketchbook tucked into my bag like a talisman. The auditorium was packed, the air humming with anticipation. When my name was called, I walked to the podium, my heart pounding so loud, I was sure the microphone would pick it up. I looked out at the sea of faces, artists with paint-stained hands, collectors in sharp suits, students clutching notebooks, and I froze. Then I saw Maya in the crowd, sitting near the front with her mom, her eyes wide with pride. She gave me a small wave, and I felt a surge of courage. "I'm Zoe." I started, my voice trembling, "and I'm an artist." But for a long time, I didn't believe I was allowed to be. I told them everything, not just about Unseen, but about the reunion, my parents' dismissal, the years of doubt. I talked about Nana Ruth, about Maya, about the fire that kept me painting, even when it felt pointless. I didn't sugarcoat it. I let the pain and the triumph bleed into my words. When I finished, the room was silent for a moment, and I thought I'd bombed. Then the applause started loud and warm, and I saw Maya clapping harder than anyone, her face glowing. Afterward, people crowded around me, asking questions, sharing their own stories. A young woman, maybe 20, told me she'd stopped painting because her parents said it was a waste of time. "You made me want to try again," she said, her eyes shining. I hugged her, my own eyes stinging, and realized Lena was right. My truth was enough. That night, I went home and painted until dawn, a new piece taking shape, bright, bold, unapologetic. I called it Visible, and it felt like a declaration. The conference was a turning point. Galleries started calling with offers for solo shows, and I signed with one in Chicago, a space I dreamed of showing in since I was a broke art student. I was painting more than ever, my work evolving in ways I hadn't expected. Visible was just the start. My new pieces were bigger, braver, full of colors I'd been too afraid to use before. I felt like I was finally stepping into the artist I'd always wanted to be. Not just for myself, but for Maya, for Nana Ruth, for every woman who'd ever been told her dreams were too small. But the shadow of my family still lingered. I'd started getting texts from cousins, vague messages like, "Heard you're doing big things." I ignored them, but they grated on me. Where were they when I was wasting my life? Why did it take $1 million sale for them to notice me? I knew I'd have to face them eventually, but I wasn't ready, not yet. I wanted to hold on to this moment, this version of myself, a little longer. One day while I was setting up for a class at the community center, Maya came in with a newspaper. "Miss Zoe, look," she said, thrusting it at me. It was a local arts section with a headline, "Chicago Artist's $1 Million Masterpiece Shakes Up Art World." My face stared back at me, a photo from the conference, and I felt a mix of pride and unease. The article was glowing, but it mentioned my humble beginnings in Ohio, and I knew it wouldn't be long before my family saw it. Small towns talk, and my parents were bound to hear. Sure enough, a few days later, I got a voicemail from my mom. Her voice was hesitant, not the pitying tone I was used to. "Zoe, we saw the article. We didn't know. Can you call me? I listened to it." 3 times, my finger hovering over the delete button. Part of me wanted to call to hear what she had to say, but another part, the part that had cried in that bathroom, the part that had fought for every scrap of self-worth, couldn't do it. Not yet. I put my phone down and went back to my canvas, letting the paint say what I couldn't. I was starting to understand something Nana Ruth had tried to tell me. My worth wasn't tied to their approval or anyone's. It was in the work I did, the lives I touched, the truth I told. I thought about Maya's drawing the girl in the storm, and I realized I was becoming her fierce, unbreakable Visible. The world was finally seeing me, and for the first time I was seeing myself. The spotlight was brighter now, and I was learning to stand in it. My solo show at the Chicago Gallery was set for 3 months out, and the preparation consumed me. I was painting with a ferocity I hadn't known I had, filling canvases with colors that felt like they were bursting out of me, crimson turquoise gold shades that demanded to be seen. Visible had been the first, but now there were others. Rise a towering piece with jagged peaks of black and white. Echo a softer work, all greens and purples, like a forest whispering its secrets. Each one felt like a piece of my soul, a story I'd been too afraid to tell until now. Lena would stop by my studio, her eyes wide as she took in the new work. "Zoe, this is next level," she'd say, and I'd blush, still not used to the praise. Teaching remained my anchor. The community center was my safe haven where I could be Miss Zoe, not the artist from the headlines. Maya was thriving, her sketches growing more intricate, her confidence blooming. One day she brought in a painting, a small canvas but bold, with a girl standing on a cliff. Arms outstretched the sky, ablaze with color. "It's me," she said, grinning. "You told me to keep creating, so I did." I hugged her, my heart swelling. Watching her find her voice reminded me why I'd fought so hard to keep mine. I started bringing Nana Ruth's sketchbook to class, showing the kids her drawings, telling them about the woman who'd never stopped dreaming, even when the world told her to. They loved it, especially Maya, who'd trace the dresses with her finger, asking questions about Nana's life. But the world outside the center was relentless. My name was everywhere: art blogs, local news, even a mention in a national magazine. The article called me the voice of a generation, which made me laugh and cringe at the same time. Me a voice. I was just a woman who painted her pain and hoped someone would understand. But the attention brought opportunities I couldn't ignore. A gallery in New York wanted to show my work. A university asked me to guest lecture. I said yes to it all, not because I felt ready, but because I was tired of saying no to myself. The money from the auction was another beast. $1 million minus fees and taxes was still a life-changing sum. I paid off my student loans, moved to a bigger apartment with a proper studio space, and bought supplies I'd only dreamed of: high-quality paints, huge canvases, a new easel that didn't wobble. But the rest sat in my bank account untouched. I didn't know what to do with it. Buy a house. Travel part of me wanted to hold onto it, a safety net, after years of scraping by. Another part felt like it wasn't really mine, like it belonged to the Zoe who'd painted unseen, not the one staring at her reflection now. My family's silence was louder than ever. My mom's voicemail had been the only contact, and I still hadn't called her back. I'd get texts from cousins now, and then congratulatory messages that felt hollow. "So proud of you," one said from an aunt who'd laughed at my mom's toast. I didn't respond. Ethan hadn't reached out at all, which stung more than I wanted to admit. I'd always hoped deep down that he'd see me as more than the artsy sister he pitied. But his silence was an answer, and I was learning to live with it. One night I got a call from Nana Ruth. Her voice was warm, but there was an edge to it, like she was holding something back. "Zoe, I saw your name in the paper," she said. $1 million. My girl, I always knew you'd shine." I laughed, tears pricking my eyes, and told her everything: the auction, the conference, the solo show. She listened, her pride so palpable I could feel it through the phone. But then she sighed, and I braced myself. "Your parents, they're talking about you now. They're proud in their way. But they don't know how to say it." I didn't know what to feel. Proud. After all these years, they had their chance. "Nana," I said, my voice sharper than I meant, "they don't get to claim this now." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "I know, sweetheart, but you're bigger than their mistakes. Don't let their smallness dim your light." Her words stayed with me, heavy and true. I wanted to be bigger, to rise above the hurt, but it wasn't easy. The pain was a knot in my chest, and every thought of the reunion tightened it. The solo show was getting closer, and the gallery was buzzing with plans. They wanted a big opening with press collectors, the whole art world circus. I was nervous but excited, pouring everything into the new work. One Piece Roots was my favorite, a massive canvas, all earth tones and golds, with shapes that looked like trees reaching for the sky. It was about Nana Ruth, about Maya, about every woman who'd kept going, despite the weight of the world. I painted it with her sketchbook, opened her dresses, inspiring the textures, the way the colors bled into each other. A week before the show, I got an email that stopped me cold. It was from an art school in Chicago, one I'd applied to decades ago, the one my parents refused to pay for. They'd read about Unseen and wanted to offer me an honorary degree to recognize my extraordinary contribution to the arts. I stared at the screen, my hands shaking. An honorary degree. From the school that had once been my dream, the one I'd cried over when my parents said no. I called Lena barely coherent, and she screamed so loud I had to hold the phone away. "Zoe, this is huge. You're a legend." I said yes, of course. But the news brought a flood of emotions I wasn't ready for. I thought about 18-year-old Zoe, sneaking application forms, believing art school would be her escape. I thought about the fight with my parents, their faces hard, as they told me it was a waste. I wanted to call them to say, "Look at me now," but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I went to the community center and told Maya. Her eyes lit up, and she hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. "You're like a superhero, Miss Zoe," she said, and I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The degree ceremony was scheduled for a month after the solo show, and I started to see it as a milestone, a way to close one chapter and start another. I was changing not just as an artist, but as a person. I stood taller, spoke louder, believed in myself in a way I never had. I'd spent so long hiding, afraid of being seen, but now I was ready. Not for my family's approval, but for the world's, for Maya's, for Nana Ruth's. I started thinking about the auction money again, what it could do beyond my own needs. I remembered the art school, how it had been my dream, and how many kids like Maya might never get the chance. An idea took root small at first, but growing with every late-night painting session. What if I could help them? What if I could give someone else the chance I'd been denied? I didn't tell anyone yet, not even Lena, but it felt right, like a piece of the puzzle clicking into place. As the solo show approached, I felt a mix of nerves and certainty. This was my moment, not just to show my work, but to show myself. I wasn't the Zoe who'd cried in the bathroom, or the one who'd begged her parents to believe in her. I was someone new, someone who'd fought for every inch of this life, and wasn't going to apologize for it. I looked at roots, at the trees reaching upward, and I knew I was ready. Have you ever had a moment where you realized you didn't need anyone's permission to be yourself? How did it feel to finally step into your own light? I was ready. The solo show was days away, and my new studio was a whirlwind of activity canvases. Leaning against walls, paint tubes scattered like confetti, the air thick with the sharp scent of turpentine. Roots stood at the center, its golden trees catching the light, a silent promise of everything I'd fought for. Lena was in and out, coordinating with the gallery, her phone glued to her ear as she argued about lighting and wall space. "Zoe, this is going to be massive," she'd say. Her eyes sparkling with the kind of belief I was still learning to hold for myself. I'd nod my stomach, a knot of nerves and excitement, and keep painting, adding final touches to pieces that felt like they were shouting my truth. The community center was my refuge as always. Maya and the kids were buzzing about the show, even though most of them couldn't come. The opening was a fancy affair with tickets priced for collectors, not high schoolers. I promised to bring photos to tell them every detail, and Maya made me pinky swear. "You're gonna be a rock star, Miss Zoe," she said, her grin wide enough to light up the room. I laughed, but her words stayed with me. A reminder that this wasn't just about me. It was about her, about Nana Ruth, about every kid who'd ever been told their dreams were too big. The idea about the auction money had grown into a plan when I was finally ready to act on. I'd been researching art schools, talking to Lena in vague terms about scholarships, but now it was real. I wanted to donate the bulk of the money, hundreds of thousands of dollars, to create a fund for young artists who couldn't afford tuition kids like Maya, like the 18-year-old me who'd cried when her parents said no. I hadn't told anyone yet, not even Nana Ruth, but the thought of it made my heart race. It wasn't about the money itself, It was about giving someone else the chance I'd clawed my way toward. I contacted the Chicago Art School, the one offering me the honorary degree, and set up a meeting for after the show. They were thrilled, and I could hear the shock in their director's voice when I mentioned the amount. "This could change lives, Zoe," she said, and I believed her. The night of the solo show arrived like a storm, sudden, electric, unstoppable. The gallery was a sleek, white-walled space in downtown Chicago, packed with people in sharp suits and flowing dresses, their voices a low hum under the clink of wine glasses. My paintings lined the walls, each one lit like a jewel, their colors so vivid they seemed to pulse. Roots was the centerpiece, drawing gasps and whispers from the crowd. I wore a deep green dress Lena had picked out my hair loose, Nana Ruth's sketchbook tucked into my bag for courage. I felt like I was floating, like the Zoe who'd hidden in that bathroom at the reunion was a ghost watching this new version of herself take center stage. The opening was a blur of handshakes and compliments faces I didn't know, telling me my work had moved them. A critic from a major art magazine pulled me aside, saying, "Your vulnerability is your strength, Zoe. This show is a triumph." I thanked him, my cheeks burning, but inside I was reeling. Vulnerability. That's what Unseen had been. What all my work was a raw, open wound, turned into something beautiful. I scanned the room looking for Maya's mom, who'd managed to get a ticket, and found her near Echo. Her eyes teary as she smiled at me. I hugged her, whispering, "Thank you for bringing Maya into my life." Halfway through the night, Lena grabbed my arm, her face pale. "Zoe, you need to see this." She led me to a corner where a small group was gathered around a phone, their voices hushed. My heart sank, expecting bad news, a scathing review, a mix-up with the gallery. But then I saw the screen. It was a live news broadcast, an art segment, and the anchor was talking about me. Chicago artist Zoe Harper has taken the art world by storm, she said, with her solo show opening tonight, and her painting Unseen selling for $1 million at auction earlier this year. The camera cut to a clip of the auction paddles. Flying then to a photo of me at the conference, my face serious as I spoke. The anchor's voice continued. "Harper's work is a testament to resilience. A voice for those who've been overlooked." The room around me seemed to freeze. People were staring, whispering, their eyes wide with something like awe. Lena squeezed my hand, her voice a whisper. "You're a big deal, Zoe." I laughed shaky, but the weight of it hit me. This wasn't just a show, a sale, a moment. This was my life, my truth, broadcast to the world. I thought of Nana Ruth, of her sketchbook, of the dresses she'd never made, and I felt her with me, cheering me on. The rest of the night was a dream. Collectors bought pieces visible in Rise, sold before the night was over, and the gallery director told me the show was already being called a landmark. I mingled, smiled, answered questions, but my mind kept drifting to the news segment, to the idea that my story was out there reaching people I'd never meet. I wondered if my family had seen it, if they were watching from their Ohio living room, their faces tight with shock or pride or something in between. I didn't know, and for the first time I realized I didn't care. Not the way I used to. Their approval wasn't the goal anymore. The next morning, my phone was flooded with messages, friends, colleagues, strangers who'd seen the broadcast. Maya texted me a string of heart emojis and a photo of her sketching captioned, "Inspired by you, Miss Zoe." I laughed my heart full and called Nana Ruth to tell her about the show. She listened, her voice thick with emotion. "My girl," she said, "you're doing what I never could. You're making the world see." I cried then, not from pain, but from gratitude, from the weight of knowing I was carrying her dreams with mine. The meeting with the art school came a week later. I sat in the director's office, Nana Ruth's sketchbook on my lap, and laid out my plan, a scholarship fund, fully endowed with the auction money for students who couldn't afford tuition. I wanted it named after Nana Ruth, a tribute to the woman who'd kept me going. The director was stunned, her eyes shining as she shook my hand. This will change everything for so many kids, she said. I thought of Maya, of the girl in her painting standing on the cliff, and I knew it was right. The honorary degree ceremony was next, and I was starting to feel like I was living in a movie, each moment bigger, brighter, more surreal. I was painting non-stop, preparing for the New York show, guest lecturing at the university, and planning the scholarship fund's launch. I was exhausted but alive every day, a step further into the life I'd always wanted. My family's silence was still there, a faint ache, but it was fading, overshadowed by the people who saw me, Lena, Maya, Nana, Ruth, the strangers who wrote me letters, saying my work had given them courage. I knew the confrontation was coming, though. The news segment, the articles, the small-town gossip. It was only a matter of time before my parents, Ethan, the whole family, had to face what they'd dismissed. I wasn't afraid anymore, not like I used to be. I was ready to stand in my truth, to let them see the Zoe I'd become. Not for their approval, but for me. Up with the gallery. But then I saw the screen. It was a live news broadcast, an art segment, and the anchor was talking about me. Chicago artist Zoe Harper has taken the art world by storm, she said with her solo show opening tonight, and her painting Unseen, selling for $1 million at auction earlier this year. The camera cut to a clip of the auction paddles, flying then to a photo of me at the conference, my face serious as I spoke. The anchor's voice continued. Harper's work is a testament to resilience, a voice for those who've been overlooked. The room around me seemed to freeze. People were staring, whispering, their eyes wide with something like awe. Lena squeezed my hand, her voice a whisper. "You're a big deal, Zoe." I laughed shaky, but the weight of it hit me. This wasn't just a show, a sale, a moment. This was my life, my truth, broadcast to the world. I thought of Nana Ruth, of her sketchbook, of the dresses she'd never made, and I felt her with me, cheering me on. The rest of the night was a dream. Collectors bought pieces, visible and rise, sold before the night was over, and the gallery director told me the show was already being called a landmark. I mingled, smiled, answered questions, but my mind kept drifting to the news segment, to the idea that my story was out there reaching people I'd never meet. I wondered if my family had seen it, if they were watching from their Ohio living room, their faces tight with shock or pride or something in between. I didn't know, and for the first time I realized I didn't care. Not the way I used to. Their approval wasn't the goal anymore. The next morning, my phone was flooded with messages, friends, colleagues, strangers who'd seen the broadcast. Maya texted me a string of heart emojis and a photo of her sketching captioned, "Inspired by you, Miss Zoe." I laughed my heart full and called Nana Ruth to tell her about the show. She listened, her voice thick with emotion. "My girl," she said, "you're doing what I never could. You're making the world see." I cried then, not from pain, but from gratitude, from the weight of knowing I was carrying her dreams with mine. The meeting with the art school came a week later. I sat in the director's office, Nana Ruth's sketchbook on my lap, and laid out my plan, a scholarship fund, fully endowed with the auction money for students who couldn't afford tuition. I wanted it named after Nana Ruth, a tribute to the woman who'd kept me going. The director was stunned, her eyes shining as she shook my hand. "This will change everything for so many kids," she said. I thought of Maya, of the girl in her painting standing on the cliff, and I knew it was right. But the world wasn't done with me yet. The news segment had spread, picked up by bigger outlets, and my story was everywhere. I got a call from a producer in New York, asking if I'd consider a documentary about my journey. I said I'd think about it, still reeling from the idea that my life was worth filming. Then came the invitation to the next family reunion. A handwritten note from my mom slipped into an envelope with my name in her careful cursive. "Zoe, we'd love to see you," it read. "We're so proud of what you've done." Proud. That word again, the one Nana Ruth had warned me about. I held the note, my hands steady, and set it aside. I wasn't ready to decide, not yet. The reunion was a month away, the same weekend as the honorary degree ceremony. I knew I couldn't do both, and the choice felt like a fork in the road. The ceremony was a celebration of everything I'd built, a chance to stand on a stage and accept a dream I'd been denied. The reunion was something else, a reckoning maybe, a chance to face the people who'd shaped me for better or worse. I thought about my mom's note about Ethan's silence, about the laughter that had followed me into that bathroom. I thought about Nana Ruth, her fierce eyes, telling me I was bigger than their mistakes. I chose the ceremony, not out of spite, but because it was mine. The art school had transformed the event into something bigger, announcing the Ruth Harper Scholarship Fund at the same time. They'd invited Maya and her mom Lena, even a few of my students from the community center. It felt like a homecoming, not to a place, but to myself. The day before, I finished a new painting, Legacy, a swirling mix of blues and golds with shapes that looked like hands reaching out. It was for Nana Ruth, for Maya, for every kid who'd get a chance because of the fund. I hung it in my studio next to Roots and felt a quiet peace settle over me. The ceremony was held in a grand auditorium, the kind of place that makes you feel small and infinite at the same time. I wore a dress I'd chosen myself, deep indigo like unseen, and carried Nana Ruth's sketchbook under my arm. The room was packed with students, faculty, and strangers who'd read about me. Maya sat in the front row, her sketchbook on her lap, her grin so wide it hurt to look at. When my name was called, I walked to the stage, my heart steady, and accepted the degree. The dean read a citation, calling me a beacon of resilience, and I felt the weight of every year, every tear, every canvas I'd poured myself into. Then came the announcement of the scholarship fund. The dean explained its purpose, its name, and the room erupted in applause. I looked at Maya, at Lena, at the faces of kids who might one day benefit, and I felt something shift inside me. This was bigger than me, bigger than the reunion, bigger than the pain I'd carried. I spoke briefly, my voice clear, telling the story of Nana Ruth, of her sketchbook of the fire she'd passed to me. This fund is for the dreamers, I said, the ones who've been told they're not enough. You are, and we're here to help you prove it. The applause was deafening, but it was Maya's face that stayed with me, her eyes shining with pride. After she hugged me, whispering, "You're my hero, Miss Zoe," I hugged her back, tears spilling, and knew I'd made the right choice. The reunion could wait, or maybe it didn't need to happen at all. I'd faced my family in my own way, not with anger, but with a legacy that would outlive their doubt. That night, I got a text from my mom. Saw the ceremony on the news. "Zoe, we're so sorry. Please come home." I read it, my heart twisting, and put my phone down. I didn't know if I'd go, if I'd forgive, if I'd ever sit at their table again. But I knew it didn't define me anymore. I walked to my studio, opened Nana Ruth's sketchbook, and traced the lines of a dress she'd never made. "Thank you," I whispered, not just to her, but to myself, to the Zoe who'd kept going. The days after the ceremony felt like the calm after a storm. My studio was quieter now, the frenzy of the solo show and the degree ceremony giving way to a rhythm that felt mine. I was still painting, still teaching, still answering emails from galleries and curators, but there was a steadiness in me, a certainty I hadn't known before. Legacy hung in my studio, its blues and golds catching the morning light. A reminder of the scholarship fund of Nana Ruth, of the kids who'd get a chance because of it. Maya's words, "You're my hero." Miss Zoe echoed in my mind, grounding me in a way nothing else could. I was 37, and for the first time I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. But my mom's text lingered a small stone in my shoe. Saw the ceremony on the news. "Zoe, we're so sorry. Please come home." I hadn't responded, hadn't even opened the message again, but it was there tugging at me. Part of me wanted to ignore it forever, to let the distance between us grow until it was a chasm too wide to cross. Another part, the part that remembered family dinners. My mom's laugh when I was a kid, the way she'd braid my hair before school. Wondered if there was something worth salvaging. I didn't know what forgiveness looked like or if I was capable of it, but the question wouldn't leave me alone. I threw myself into my work as always. The New York Gallery was pushing for a show in 6 months, and I was already sketching ideas, big bold pieces that felt like the next chapter of Unseen and Legacy. I was teaching more classes at the community center, too inspired by the scholarship fund. Maya was my star student, her paintings growing so confident I started joking she'd have her own show soon. "Only if you're there, Miss Zoe," she'd say, and I'd laugh, promising I wouldn't miss it. I brought Nana Ruth's sketchbook to every class, letting the kids flip through it, telling them stories about her life. It was my way of keeping her close, of honoring the woman who'd seen me when no one else did. The scholarship fund was taking shape, with the art school sending me updates on the first applicants. They were kids like Maya, talented, driven, but stuck behind financial walls. One was a 17-year-old girl from a small town in Illinois whose portfolio was full of raw emotional drawings. "She reminds me of you," the director wrote, and I smiled, my heart swelling. I started planning a visit to the school to meet the applicants, to tell them their dreams were worth fighting for. It felt like a calling bigger than my paintings, bigger than me. But my family was still out there, a shadow I couldn't fully escape. A week after the ceremony, I got a call from Nana Ruth. Her voice was softer than usual, tired, and I felt a pang of worry. "Zoe, I need to tell you something," she said. "Your parents, they're struggling. They saw the news, the ceremony, all of it. They know they were wrong, but they don't know how to fix it." I listened, my throat tight, waiting for the part where she'd ask me to call them, to go home to make it right. But she didn't. "I'm not telling you what to do," she said. "I just want you to know they're human, and humans make mistakes. You decide what's next." Her words stayed with me, heavy and complicated. I wanted to be the bigger person, like she'd always said, but the pain was still there, sharp and real. I thought about the reunion, my mom's toast, Ethan's smirk, the laughter that had cut me open. Could I sit across from them now? Knowing what I knew, being who I was, I didn't have an answer, so I did what I always did. I painted. A new piece. Forgive started to take shape, deep purples and silvers, with shapes that looked like hands reaching across a divide. It wasn't finished, and neither was I. The documentary producer called again, more insistent this time. They wanted to start filming in a month, following me through the New York show, interviewing Maya Lena, maybe even Nana Ruth. I was hesitant, my life felt too raw, too personal. But Lena was all for it. "Zoe, this is a chance to tell your story your way," she said. "Think of the people it could reach." I thought of the girl at the conference, the one who'd stopped painting because her parents didn't believe in her. Maybe this was for her, for all the dreamers out there. I said yes with conditions, no sensationalism, no digging into my family drama unless I approved. They agreed, and I felt a strange mix of nerves and excitement, like I was stepping into another unknown. One afternoon, while I was setting up for a class, Maya came in with a letter. "It's for you," she said, her eyes bright. It was from her mom, a thank you for everything I'd done for Maya, but there was more, an invitation to Maya's first art show, a small student exhibition at the community center. "You have to come," Miss Zoe, Maya said, bouncing on her toes. "You're the reason I'm doing this." I hugged her, promising I'd be there, and felt a warmth spread through me. This was why I kept going, for moments like this, for kids like her. The student show was a week later, and I walked into the community center to find it transformed, walls covered with paintings and drawings. Kids running around, parents beaming. Maya's work was in the corner, a series of small canvases, each one vibrant and fearless. I found her standing by her favorite, the girl on the cliff, and pulled her into a hug. "You're incredible," I said, and she grinned, her face glowing. I looked around at the kids showing off their work, at the parents who'd shown up, and I realized this was my family too. Not the one I was born into, but the one I'd built. That night, I went home and opened my mom's note again. I read it slowly, tracing the words with my finger. "We're so sorry. Please come home." I thought about Nana Ruth, about her warning to be bigger than their mistakes. I thought about Maya, about the scholarship fund, about the life I was creating. And I made a decision not to go home, not yet, but to write back. Not with anger, not with pain, but with truth. I sat at my kitchen table, Nana Ruth's sketchbook open beside me, and wrote, "Mom, I'm glad you're proud, but pride isn't enough. For years you made me feel like I was less, like my dreams were a waste. I've built a life I love, not because of you, but despite you. I don't know if I can come home, but I'm open to talking if you're ready to listen." I sealed the letter, my hands steady, and mailed it the next day. It wasn't forgiveness, not exactly, but it was a start. A door cracked open. I kept painting, kept teaching, kept moving forward. The New York show was coming, the documentary was starting, and the scholarship fund was growing. My life was full, not with the approval I'd once craved, but with purpose, with love, with the knowledge that I was enough. I hung Forgive in my studio, its hands still reaching, and I knew I'd finish it one day when I was ready. My worth didn't depend on their validation or anyone's. It was in every brushstroke, every kid I taught, every dream I helped come true. I looked at Nana Ruth's sketchbook, at the dresses she'd never made, and I smiled. "This is for you," I whispered, and I meant it for her, for Maya, for me, for every woman who'd ever been told to be small. I was Zoe, and I was enough.